All right, welcome back, everybody. Just here hanging out at my house. Sorry, it's such a mess. This is the second video that I'm making for training. So, last week we talked about how we don't have a Comm 380 class, so we're going to do some training this way, and we went over the consultant quiz. This week we are going to talk about interpersonal communication. This should be fairly brief, but I want you to just get an idea of what interpersonal communication is and how we use it specifically in the lab on a couple different levels. So let's shrink me down and go over here. All right, so here's what I want to cover. First of all, it's important just to understand that interpersonal means between people. So whenever we have two or more people communicating, it's interpersonal communication. And, this is a really broad area of study because it can be applied to so many different aspects of how we live our lives and how we communicate in our lives. For us, what we want to focus on are staff to staff communication, staff to client or client back to staff communication, and then staff and other. And we'll talk about what all those mean. So with staff to staff, it's obvious, right? You're talking to one another. This could be in a variety of contexts, though. And that's what really matters and what I want to focus on. So all of the returning folks can tell you, and I've mentioned this to the new folks before, but when we are in the speech lab proper, 154 Lake Michigan, or in our virtual space, we are very open with communication. And that can be good or bad depending on your thoughts. But, it's something that allows us to really get to know each other. And that's where the bonding and relationships idea comes from, because that's primarily what staff to staff communication at the lab is. And so one of the reasons I bring this up is because I want to make sure everybody can differentiate between the way we talk to each other and the way we talk to other people, or the way that we talk to each other in front of other people. And so, again, I think this is obvious, but the Writing Center has a little different take on it. And so if they can do it wrong, as I would say, I want to make sure we're doing it right. And here's the situation. So when we're in our office in 154, we are very free. We can speak our minds, talk about any topic that comes up, and we know that, no harm is meant, or no, insults are intended, even if it comes across that way. And this isn't like groundbreaking. I mean, imagine that you're out with your best friend somewhere, and if someone didn't know you and were sitting maybe at the table across from you or a booth or whatever, and you all are having a conversation, they may think that you're not friends at all. I mean, I don't know how you are, but I know with me, when I go places with friends, which doesn't ever happen because, I'm a dad, and friends are important to do that too. And that's you. So, good luck. But, you could imagine two folks out and they're just insulting each other as humor. And that happens a lot because there is this, interrelational understanding that it's not intended. And we never really have these discussions like, hey, I'm going to make fun of you now, but I don't mean it. We just do it because that's what humans do. And so if something comes up when we're critical, or if we are, offensive in some way, realize that that is not what was intended, even if it feels like that. And now you have a right to feel however you want. We know that in interpersonal communication, meaning of a message always lies with the receiver, not the sender. And so I want you to also know that if you do feel that way, you should feel free in that moment to voice that opinion, to say, hey, whoa, don't you think that's a little far? And that's how we become friends. That's how we get to know each other. That's how we know what people are comfortable with, what they're not, what we understand as acceptable and what we don't. I don't police that because I don't believe in policing that kind of communication, even in the workplace, when it is in a group setting that's behind closed doors, or it's all members of the group present and only members of the group present. So feel free to just sort of explore that, if you will. Now, another way that we use staff to staff communication is when we are interacting with each other about the job. So this could be learning and training. And if that's done in a only group members present setting, that can look different than if it's happening, in front of outsiders. And again, this isn't novel. This isn't new. Think about how you would interact with a friend versus how you interact with a professor or a parent or whoever, someone who, you're a little more structured, a little more formal around. And as long as we understand those differences, we're fine. Learning and training between staff, again, is something that we take very seriously. It's what sets us apart from other places. It's what makes us nationally certified. And so we want to make sure that that happens in a very effective way. If you are ever in a situation where you feel like, okay, we really need to get off of the bonding relationship area and move to this more formal learning and training, no one's going to think less of you because you bring that up. I just want to be clear. Sometimes we need that, right? We need someone to say, all right, this is great, but let's go to this training. I had some questions, or we need to cover this, or I want to get finished with the training. And, people will understand and agree that's what needs to happen. Again, going to this setting and context, all I really, again, want you to know there is to remember to contextualize everything and to consider the setting. So the Writing Center, as I was mentioning earlier, they are very formal within their own space, but when they go to a more public space, the knowledge market, they are less formal. And that's not what I think is the appropriate way. I think when we're out in public, quote unquote, we need to be as professional as we can when people are listening, when people are observing. And so I reserve our more lax time for when we're in the lab together. So what I'll say about interpersonal communication and staff to staff relationships is that it plays a different role depending if it's meant to be a training moment or if it's a bonding moment. And it's usually one of the two. Now, as far as staff and client communication goes, we do a lot of this, obviously, when clients come in. That's sort of our thing, is talking to them. But I do want to point out a couple of ideas that are important to consider. First of all, small talk is vital. And I don't mean to waste time or to treat them the way we treat each other in this very, informal way. What I mean is it's important that we put our clients at ease. And so the way we do that is when we engage in small talk. And that could be anything from how's the weather? What do you think about your semester so far? Janine, I think, brought up in training that we should probably avoid COVID-related topics. But anything that you can bring up to get their mind away from what they're doing for just a second is a good way to build a relationship with that client. Again, it'll be a very different relationship than those we build with one another, but it's still important that we make them feel comfortable, that we're humanizing ourselves to them, because while many people that come to the lab have been here before, or they are, not really concerned, quite a few folks that come to the lab are anxious because they're coming to the lab. I mean, they have a need that they can't quite get through themselves, and that's where we come in. And so to feel that way can be vulnerable. And it's important that we respect that and that we do what we can to make them feel like, hey, this is normal to come here, no big deal. Let's just see what we can get done. Now, when clients come in, again, they're here because they need some assistance. They need to collaborate. Sure, some are here because they have to be, but the majority of folks come in to work on an assignment. And you've all heard this idea that the customer is always right. Well, in our case, the client's always right, except when they're not, and they probably aren't much. But we can't let them know that. So here is where it's really important that we make our clients feel like they've won or that they're right. I like the winning and losing metaphors with interpersonal communication. We'll do more of that at another time. But, if your client comes in and they say, I've got a persuasive speech here, or I'm sorry, an informative speech here, and you listen to it and it's very persuasive, and you say things like, do you think there's any parts of that could be considered persuasive? And they may instantly respond with, no, I mean, that's only an informative speech. And then you dig further. Well, what about when you say this? Do you think that that is a persuasive element? Oh, well, maybe just slightly, but I mean, you see where I'm going. You keep asking questions, ask questions and more questions. And through asking those questions, you're going to show them examples of why they're wrong. However, it's important that you then say something to the effect of, so you're right, this is a very informative speech, but there's just a couple little things that we need to tweak. You're in fine shape. It's not, I'm not telling you to lie to your clients. I'm telling you to make them feel as though they're on the right path. They don't want to feel as though they're not, because what we run the risk of is saying to them, no, this is completely wrong. Let's start this whole thing over. Their confidence goes down, which will make their performance probably go down. And we're just not in that business. We want to keep them as confident as we can while still correcting what they're doing wrong so that the assignment is done correctly. So making them feel like they've won or that they're right is important. And you can do this while still correcting. We had a consultant at one time named Jane Ulry, who is Levi's godmother. And she had this great style about her of asking people, so how do you think that went? And oh, no, I thought it went great. Well, I think everything was good. What do you think? She'll be like, okay, perfect. No, things need to change, but that's perfect though. And then, you have to know Jane to see how she did that. But the idea there is we're reassuring, no, you're fine, but here are some things we need to do because this speech is good. And so we just want to make it better. Again, I don't want you to feel like you have to placate to your client. And if they are combative, if with even the slightest hint of correction or feedback, don't feel like you need to continue down that path. People need to realize we're giving you an out here. So just take my advice. And, some people will, some people won't, but I think you're going to be in much better shape if we work on making them comfortable, validating what they're saying, letting them know that parts of their work is very correct. And we want to celebrate that, highlight that, and give them more feedback. So again, this could be using the Socratic approach in full effect here. If you have ever interacted with someone who was wrong and you want to tell them the right thing to do or what the right answer is or the truth, you can ask them questions that will make them say the words, right? So let's say, I don't know if you can see. Yeah, this is Diet Coke. So if you ask someone, hey, what's in that can? They're like, oh, that must be water. Have you ever seen water in a can? Well, yeah, but usually it's for disaster areas and that kind of thing. Well, yeah, no, I've seen that too, but this isn't a disaster, so maybe it's not water. What usually comes in a can that looks like this? Well, it's probably pop. Yeah, I think you're right on that one for sure. Now, it's that color of the can, so what color does that go with? You've seen this before. Oh, it's like Diet Coke. Oh, however that might go. That's not a great example, but the idea is you keep asking questions until they get it right. And then you say, oh, wow, that's a really good idea. You're right. Give it to them. Give them the credit. Now, when it comes to interacting with other people outside of clients and staff, be professional. That's all I'll say. And if there's a time when you can't give them what they want, whether that's information, whether that is a finite answer, we can or can't do something, you can always just blame me, right? So just be like, actually you need to talk to Carl about that. And then you can direct them to my email address, or you can take a very detailed note or whatever it is that you need to do. But you can always push it back to me and say, I don't want to tell you wrong. So let me get you to check with Carl on that one. Now, when you think about all of these examples, it's important that you read the room. And what I mean by that is if you are attentive to what's going on around you, with the people around you, you often know or can at least be cued into limitations and expectations. So this could be applied to all three of the levels here. So staff to staff. As I mentioned before, we're a pretty close-knit group. And so when we have new members of our group, like the people in training right now, it's easy for us to get carried away. And when we do that, it can be a little sometimes shocking to other people that we are so forward with one another. It could be a language issue. It could be a topics issue. It could be whatever. But read the room for returning folks and realize that, hey, new folks don't realize we do this. And there's something to be said about throwing people in the deep end. And then they learn to swim that way. But then the other outcome is they drown and die. So throwing people in the deep end isn't always a great idea. We want to sort of walk them down the steps and then through the water and let it get, waist high, chest high, and then they learn to swim. But we don't always have to throw people in if they're not comfortable. And how do we know without being like, hey, does this make you uncomfortable? Because what would a new person normally say? Oh, no, I'm fine. We need to read the room. We're smart enough to do that. And so do that not only with each other, but the next area, the clients. You can usually tell if someone's nervous, if they are lazy, if they're just there because they have to be, if they're disinterested, or if they're really genuinely confused and they want to understand things better. So make sure that you don't turn that off. There's something to be said about treating everyone the same. And I believe in that when it comes to rules and, integrity, that sort of stuff. But don't treat everyone the same when it comes to style, because you can usually read them enough to know what's likely or unlikely to be effective in terms of style or word choice or example or you name it. So make sure that you're thinking and feeling when you're in that session with your client so that you can do a better job of reading them and understanding them so that you can respond appropriately. And of course that can also go in with others, but with others, that's much more acceptable to just sort of have a standard professional, what we might call customer service approach. We all have a customer service voice, and that would be the time to use it. Now, onward with reading the room, there's a couple ideas out there that I just want to bring up briefly. And the first is uncertainty reduction theory. This is from a guy named Charles Berger in the 70s. And it basically says that the more communication there is, the less uncertainty there is. So there's a negative relationship between communication and uncertainty. As one goes up, the other goes down. What I think is important to take from that is, well, a few things. One, that's the reason that we have so much bonding and relationship building conversations at the lab, because it really does help us reduce uncertainty about each other. We know more about each other. We're familiar with each other. We want to get to know you and you want to get to know us. Again, it can go overboard when that communication over discloses too quickly. Janine and Viv wrote a really nice paper on that, so you can check that out if you are interested. What I'll say about uncertainty reduction and the clients is that they are, again, often a little anxious about coming in, and they are less likely to ask questions than most folks because they don't want to be seen as stupid or as annoying, you name it. So if you can think of questions they might have but don't want to ask and answer those questions preemptively, you're going to make them probably more comfortable. Now, more communication doesn't always mean a positive outcome of certainty. You can be very certain that you don't like someone after you communicate with them for a while. So it's not just a one-way street here, but for us, we are who we are. We need to communicate more, and then we will be less confused about people's choices, styles, preferences, personalities, you name it. So use that, try that with each other and with clients. Specifically with clients, though, you may need to really get an idea of what they need academically and personally. They may not tell you that they don't understand the idea of a thesis statement. Why? Well, because we've heard this since we were in elementary school, this term thesis statement. And to say, yeah, I don't know what that is, can be embarrassing for people. So if you see that they don't have a very good thesis statement, don't ask them, so it looks like you're a little confused with the thesis statement. Is that right? Instead, just tweak it a little and say something along the lines of, Oh, so I see you've got a thesis statement here. I wonder if there's a way that we can think about this a little differently to make it more fitting. It's still letting them know that something is amiss, but it's not saying, oh, it looks like you don't get this. So it's just using a little more tact. Then think of examples you can use. For this one, for example, if you've been around a while, my favorite exercise, if you will, to get people to think about thesis statements is to go to IMDb, the movie database, ask them what their favorite movie is, search it, pull it up, and there will be a 1-sentence summary of that movie. And I say to people, so this is the thesis of that movie. And that sometimes will help them connect it to their own work. I say things like, you don't want to say too much in the thesis because then, you might give too much away. You might let them know sort of what's coming to a point where they don't need to listen or want to listen anymore. So again, you'll learn these little tricks in your own style, your own approach to these things. But you need to know what they may be afraid to ask. So that's the academic example. Personally, maybe they're anxious, maybe they're nervous, but they don't want to tell you they're nervous. We talk in training about saying, hey, are you a little anxious about speaking? And they say no, and then we move on. And that's true. We don't want to hark on that point, because if they say no, but we still continue to just browbeat them and say, well, we think you're nervous, that's going to probably, again, make them even less comfortable. So we can drop in some information that they can use without having to direct it at them like a full frontal attack. So, you could say things like, a lot of people get anxious, first of all, normalize it. When they have to do public speaking like this, do you feel any of that going on? Oh, no, I'm not nervous at all, but they are. So personally, they need some advice on what to do. They don't want to ask for it. They don't want to admit they need that. So you could say things like, yeah, oh, that's good. I'm glad you're not, because man, when I first started doing, lots of speeches, I would get so nervous, and I had to really tell myself that, and then you can give some advice and then you can move on. So again, you don't have to hark on it, keep driving at it, but that to sort of either give them the information they need or open the door for them to see anxiety is normalized and then ask you more questions. The last thing on Read the Room is energy matching, and we'll talk more about this with communication accommodation theory later in the semester. But the idea here is that if you see a client that has really low energy, maybe they don't want to be there, they don't feel well, they're tired, whatever, you don't want to come in at your upper level energy, right? So it's, hey, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. How are you? Oh my gosh, it's great to be here. You're very unlikely to pull them up to your level. Instead, we meet them where they are. And that doesn't mean I want you to pretend to be completely disinterested and, oh, I know it's so stupid that we have to do this, but hey, whatever. But you can lower that energy level just a bit to get closer to them. And when you do that, you're much more likely to make a connection, to get them to open up, to see things as worthwhile that they may not otherwise see as such. Again, this isn't perfect science. It doesn't always work, but it's something that you can do to let them know, hey, I feel you on this. I understand where you're at. Let's still get through it. We don't have to take it on like it's the most exciting thing in the world, because for most people, unlike us, it's not. The last point here is questions. And remember, the Socratic approach is asking critical thinking questions. So I want you to make sure you're doing that. You should ask more questions than make statements. So again, getting people to answer their own questions. We just guide them through the questions we ask to get to that answer, and so you can think of a number of different examples, but it's steering is all you're doing. You're not propelling, you're letting them do that. We always say this is the client's session. It's not our session with the client. It's their session. And so we want to let them lead, but it's still something that is our job is to steer a little bit as they lead. Also, asking more questions removes potential blame. And what I mean by that is if you ask a student, are you sure that you don't need to cite any sources? Or are you sure that your professor is okay with this topic? Or something along those lines. And they say yes. it might seem to you, man, I don't know about that. We don't want to call him a liar, but if we ask more than once, we check, then we can put in the session notes. This is important. Put in the session notes. Asked client if no sources were required. Client agreed, or stated no sources are required. Therefore, we did not cover that. When the professor then gets that, if that's not accurate, he or she will then see we did our job. We can't make them give us the answer we want. So, ask those questions because it'll get them where they need to be, and it takes some of that potential blaming off of you. Also, it shows that you care. Asking to double check, triple check, and you could even say that, I don't want you to think I keep asking you this because I don't believe you. I just really want you to do is the best job that you can. And I know you do too. So I want to make sure we've got it correct, but it looks like we do now, so we can move on. And again, that can just be a small thing that really can make a big impact with particular clients. Last on here, if these questions feel annoying and you feel that the client is getting annoyed with all the questions, again, use humor to diffuse the situation and then refer back to showing that you care. So, if it's sort of question after question after question and they're like, look, I don't need to do that. Be like, no, I get it. I would probably be annoyed with me too, asking the same question 6 different ways. But realize I'm just doing my job to make sure that we're all clear and we all understand the same things, and that, we let you out of here with a better product than you had when you came in, or in a position to succeed, or whatever you want to say. But the idea overall with us in interpersonal communication is it's what we do. Public speaking is a type of interpersonal communication, but here we're not focused on that. We're focused on these one-on-one, often maybe small group interactions where when it's all staff, we are learning or we're bonding. When it's clients, we're comforting or we're teaching, leading in some ways. And when it's others, we are representing sort of us as a group, and we're showing that we understand what we can and can't do by limiting some information. And what I'm referring to there is, of course, FERPA policies, if we have someone asking for that kind of stuff. So don't forget, it's important that you understand the culture of the lab as an employee. It's also important that you realize that you, as a member of the lab, change that culture a little bit. And so if there's something that you don't like, that you're not comfortable with, that you want more of, state it. Just be clear. You're part of the group now. You can use that voice and people will listen. So don't feel like you can't do that. Read the room. Try to reduce uncertainty as much as you can. That can be through small talk. That can be through trying to really understand where someone else is without having to, just browbeat them into getting information. And then last, always use questions. We'll talk more about the Socratic approach in detail, but for now, know that it's a good thing, not only because it's what separates our style of consulting from other tutoring centers and services, but that it also shows that you care. It removes some of the blame that could be placed on you, potentially not something to worry about, and that we can use humor if it seems like the client is getting a little agitated by our use of the Socratic approach. They probably don't know what that is. They just know we keep asking them questions, and that can be a skill. How you ask the questions, how you phrase them, how often you ask the same question in different ways. You'll catch that as you continue to be a consultant. So as always, if you have questions, let me know. I'm going to go play soccer in the hallway of my house here because, why not when you can? And I will see you later. Have a great weekend if you're watching this during the weekend. If not, have a good week.